The air in the Tactical Operations Center was a stale cocktail of recycled oxygen, nervous sweat, and the bitter scent of burnt coffee. It was a temporary, subterranean box carved out of the rocky earth of a forward operating base on a border that had been bleeding for a generation. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, feeding a constellation of flickering monitors that cast a sickly green and black glow on the faces of the men within. This was General Madsen's domain, and he commanded it like a king holding court in a concrete tomb. Anya Sharma entered without a sound. She wore sterile gray fatigues, the kind favored by analysts and logistics personnel, devoid of rank insignia or unit patches. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot, and her face was a study in impassive neutrality. She carried a single datapad, its screen dark. She was a ghost at the feast of war, an unwelcome civilian appendage to the hardened military organism. General Madsen, a bull of a man with a chest full of ribbons and a jaw set in permanent disapproval, didn't turn. He stared at the massive holographic map dominating the center of the room, a topographical representation of enemy territory marked with glowing red icons. "You're late, Miss Sharma," he rumbled, his voice scraping like stones. He didn't use her rank, warrant officer, class 4, because in his eyes, she didn't have one that mattered. She was a data clerk sent from high command to justify their budgets. "My transport was delayed by the crosswinds at the landing zone, General," Anya replied, her voice even and low, absorbing the hostility without reflecting it. She found an empty console at the far end of the room, away from the core operations cluster. A young communications specialist, Corporal Reyes, shot a smirk at his neighbor, Sergeant Davies. "Watch it, Sarge. The bean counters are here to count our beans." Davies, a wiry veteran with tired eyes, grunted. "Just keep your station clean. Don't want her writing a report about dust bunnies compromising operational security." The snickers were quiet but sharp, pinpricks in the tense atmosphere. Anya slid into the chair, the worn plastic groaning under her weight. She didn't power on the primary monitor. Instead, she plugged her datapad into a secondary port, her movements economical and precise. The screen came to life not with maps or troop movements, but with cascading lines of raw signal data, intercepted chatter, bandwidth fluctuations, encrypted packet transfers. It was the digital lifeblood of the enemy, and she was here to read its pulse. Madsen finally turned, his gaze sweeping over her with casual disdain. "We're launching Operation Vulture's Nest in 2 hours. The objective is the extraction of a high-value asset, codename Scribe. He's holed up in a fortified compound in the Zargan Valley. Alpha Team is on deck," he gestured to the holographic map. "My boys will be in and out before sunrise. I trust your report will reflect the efficiency of this command." It wasn't a request for an opinion. It was a directive. He was telling her what to write before the first boot hit the ground. Anya's eyes remained on her screen, tracing a pattern in the chaos of numbers. "General," she said, her voice still quiet but cutting through the low hum of the TOC. "Have you considered the comms blackout in the eastern sector of the valley?" Madsen's face tightened. "It's a dead zone. Always has been. Mountains are rich in iron or scrambles everything. Standard operational knowledge." "It isn't a dead zone," Anya countered softly. "It's being suppressed. There's a repeating, low-frequency signal pulse originating from 3 distinct points on the ridges overlooking the primary approach vector. It's designed to mimic natural interference." Reyes snorted, unable to help himself. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've run diagnostics. It's geological. The pulse is timed," Anya continued, ignoring the corporal as if he were a piece of furniture. "It cycles every 90 seconds, just long enough for standard diagnostic software to dismiss it as an anomaly. It's not geological. It's a digital curtain. They're hiding something behind it." General Madsen walked over to her station, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. He loomed, radiating impatience and a deep, ingrained certainty in his own expertise. "Ms. Sharma, I have been fighting in these mountains since you were learning your multiplication tables. I command the finest soldiers in this hemisphere, equipped with the most advanced technology on the planet. I think we can handle a little bit of static. His tone was thick with condescension, the kind a master craftsman might use on a child who'd picked up a hammer for the first time. Your job is to observe resource allocation. Stick to your spreadsheets. Don't try to teach my men about the terrain they bleed on. He turned his back on her, a gesture of finality. Alpha Team, final preparations. Mission launches in 120 minutes. The dismissal was absolute. The men in the room took their cue from their commander. Anya Sharma, the analyst, the woman from headquarters, was an irrelevance. She had offered a warning based on ghosts in the machine, and the general had swatted it away like a fly. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned back to her datapad, her expression unreadable. She continued to watch the numbers, her fingers occasionally tapping a command, deepening her search. The digital curtain was still there, pulsing with a quiet, predatory rhythm. And in less than 2 hours, Alpha Team would walk right through it. The quiet hum of the TOC felt less like the sound of preparation and more like the drawing of a single, long final breath. Anya kept working, her focus absolute, a silent Cassandra in a room of men who had already decided their own triumphant future. She pulled up detailed topographical maps, cross-referencing them with the signal sources. She began to build a new map, one not of the physical world, but of the electronic one layered invisibly over it. It was a map of an ambush. The 2 hours leading up to the launch of Operation Vulture's Nest passed in a blur of ritualized tension. Alpha Team's operators, their faces grim under layers of camouflage paint, performed their final gear checks. The clicks and snaps of magazines being seated and harnesses being tightened were the only sharp sounds in the muffled quiet of the briefing room. In the TOC, the atmosphere was one of coiled anticipation. General Madsen paced before the holographic map, a caged predator waiting for the hunt. He barked occasional questions at Sergeant Davies, who responded with crisp, efficient updates on weather conditions, satellite uplinks, and the readiness of the exfiltration birds. Anya remained at her station, a pool of stillness in the swirling currents of activity. She had not spoken another word since the general had silenced her. Her focus was entirely on the data streaming onto her pad. She had isolated the repeating signal pulse and was now running decryption algorithms against its carrier wave. It was a faint hope. The encryption was military-grade, likely state-sponsored. But sometimes even the most sophisticated systems had lazy operators. A repeated sequence, a flawed randomization seed, a moment of carelessness, that's all she needed. Corporal Reyes, emboldened by the general's public dismissal of Anya, swaggered over with a fresh pot of coffee. He filled Madsen's mug, then Davies's, deliberately bypassing Anya's station. As he walked past, he leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't worry, ma'am. The general's always a little tense before a mission. He doesn't mean anything by it." It was a feigned apology, a backhanded insult wrapped in a thin veneer of politeness. He was reinforcing the hierarchy. She was the outsider, the sensitive civilian who needed her feelings managed. Anya didn't look up. "Corporal," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Your primary comm server has a latency of 0.7 seconds on its handshake protocol with the satellite uplink. It's negligible now, but under heavy signal traffic, it could cause cascading packet loss." Reyes blinked, his smirk faltering. "The system is green across the board. I ran a full diagnostic an hour ago." "You ran the manufacturer's diagnostic," Anya corrected, her eyes still glued to her screen. "It's designed to pass. Check the firmware logs for unauthorized access attempts from 3 weeks ago. You'll find a dormant logic bomb designed to activate during periods of high volume, encrypted communication. Like, for instance, a firefight." The corporal's face paled. He stared at her, then back at his pristine, green-lit console. He wanted to argue, to defend his turf, but the specificity of her warning, the date, the type of malware, unsettled him. He mumbled something and retreated to his station, his confidence visibly shaken. He began furiously typing, his swagger gone, replaced by a frantic need to verify her claim. Madsen overheard the exchange. He scowled, his irritation growing. This woman was a disruption. She was sowing doubt where there needed to be absolute certainty. "Ms. Sharma," he boomed from across the room. "If you have a concern with the equipment, file a report. After the mission, do not distract my personnel." "Yes, General," Anya said, her tone unchanged. She had planted the seed. Whether Reyes chose to act on it was his decision. Her attention returned to the encrypted pulse. A flicker of a pattern emerged. It wasn't a flaw in the encryption itself, but in its implementation. A human fingerprint. The operator was using a predictable sequence for the initialization vector. Lazy. Very, very lazy. It was enough. She started a new program, one she had written herself years ago. It began to hammer at the tiny crack she had found in the digital wall. "Hellos are spooled. Alpha is green for launch," Davies announced, his voice steady. "Launch," Madsen commanded. On the main screen, the icons representing the two Black Hawk helicopters carrying Alpha Team began to move across the map. They were swift, silent predators of the night, flying low through the jagged canyons to avoid detection. For the first 20 minutes, the mission was flawless. The flight was smooth. The comms were clear. Alpha's team leader, call sign Hunter 1, checked in with calm, professional brevity. Passing checkpoint Zulu. All clear. No sign of activity. Madsen allowed himself a small, smug smile. He glanced toward Anya's station. She was still staring at her screen, a statue in the flickering light. He saw her as the epitome of the new army's problem. Analysts who trusted their algorithms more than the instincts of a seasoned warrior. They saw ghosts in the static and predicted defeat from the safety of an armchair. He was about to prove her, and the entire bureaucracy she represented, wrong. 5 minutes to the LZ, Hunter 1 reported. "Valley is quiet. Too quiet." A subtle shift occurred in the TOC. The air grew heavier. Too quiet was a cliché, but it was also a phrase that put every soldier on edge. "Stay sharp, Hunter," Madsen ordered, his voice tight. The helicopter icons neared the designated landing zone, a flat, arid patch of ground a kilometer from the target compound. They were now flying directly toward the area Anya had warned about, the space behind the digital curtain. Anya's fingers stopped moving. The program she was running had finally broken through. A stream of decrypted data began to flow onto her screen. It wasn't radio chatter. It was targeting data, LiDAR scans, thermal imaging feeds, all originating from the 3 points on the ridges. They weren't just hiding something. They were coordinating a kill box. "General," Anya said, her voice sharp, urgent. "You need to abort. Now, the LZ is a trap. The entire ridge is wired. They have man-portable air defense systems locked on your birds." Madsen spun around, his face a mask of fury. "Enough. I will not have you creating panic in my TOC. Alpha, report." But the only answer from the radio was a deafening roar of static. It wasn't the gentle hiss of interference. It was a violent, overwhelming wave of electronic noise. On the main screen, a dozen new hostile icons flared to life on the ridges, blinking red like angry eyes. They had been hidden, masked by the very signal Anya had detected. Then came the sound. It ripped through the speakers, a chaotic cacophony of metal tearing, rotor blades screaming, and men yelling. The voice of Hunter 1 cut through for a single terrifying second. "Ambush! RPGs from the ridge. We're hit. We're going down." The transmission ended in a gut-wrenching shriek of tortured steel. On the holographic map, one of the helicopter icons representing Alpha Team went from green to red, then blinked out entirely. The other began to flash erratically, its flight path a drunken spiral toward the valley floor. The perfect, clean lines of General Madsen's operation had just been ripped to shreds. The quiet hum of the TOC was replaced by a stunned, horrified silence, broken only by the crackle of dead air from the speakers. The general stood frozen, his face ashen, staring at the digital graveyard where his plan had just died. The silence in the TOC was thick and suffocating. It was the sound of catastrophic failure. Corporal Reyes's hands trembled over his console, his face a ghostly white in the monitor's glow. He frantically tried to re-establish a link with Alpha, but every channel was a wall of white noise. The enemy's electronic warfare package had fully activated, a digital sledgehammer that had shattered their communications network. The logic bomb Anya had warned him about had likely triggered, corrupting the data packets before they could even leave the server. His confident smirk was a distant memory, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a man watching the world end on his screen. Sergeant Davies was barking into his own headset, trying to raise the quick reaction force station 10 miles away, but his calls were swallowed by the same electronic tempest. TOC to QRF, do you copy? Damn it, we're completely deaf. General Matson stood rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the holographic table. His authority, his certainty, his entire world had evaporated in 30 seconds of fire and static. The smugness was gone, replaced by a hollow shock. His men were dying, and he was blind, deaf, and helpless. He stared at the single, flashing red icon of the second helicopter, a dying pulse in a sea of enemy signals. Then, through the chaos, came a series of calm, measured sounds. The quiet, rhythmic clicks of a keyboard. All eyes turned to the far end of the room. Anya Sharma had not moved from her chair. She was not panicking. She was not frozen in shock. She was working. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow of her datapad, her expression one of intense, unwavering concentration. The panic washing over the room seemed to part around her, unable to touch her island of cold focus. She disconnected her datapad from the secondary port and, with a fluid, practiced motion, plugged it directly into the mainframe's auxiliary diagnostic jack, bypassing Reyes's compromised server entirely. A new command line interface filled her screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. She wasn't using the standard graphical interface. She was deep in the system's core architecture, writing code on the fly, building a new bridge through the storm. "What are you doing?" Matson's voice was a ragged whisper. "Your primary and secondary channels are compromised," Anya said without looking up, her voice a detached, clinical monotone. "The enemy is using a multispectrum jamming array, but it has a weakness. It's designed to overwhelm high-bandwidth signals, video feeds, encrypted voice. It's not optimized to detect microbursts on antiquated frequency-hopping protocols." She was talking a different language, one that left the comm specialists and the general equally lost. She pulled up a raw audio spectrum analyzer. Amidst the roaring static, she located a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of clear bandwidth, a forgotten maintenance channel used by engineers decades ago, so obsolete it wasn't even on the enemy's jamming list. It was a digital needle in a haystack of noise. She coded a simple, lightweight communication client, stripping away every non-essential protocol. It was a masterpiece of brutal efficiency. Then she began to transmit. Not voice, not text, a simple 3-pulse sequence. A digital knock at a forgotten door. She waited. For 5 agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then, a reply. 3 pulses, faint but clear. Someone was alive. Someone was listening. She typed a challenge phrase, an old Cold War-era code that hadn't been in use for 20 years. "Is the moon cold?" The reply came back, letter by agonizing letter. "Only for the lonely." It was Hunter 1, the team leader. He was alive. A collective gasp went through the TOC. Anya's fingers danced again, establishing a rudimentary text link. "Status?" She sent. "Bird 2 down. Hard landing. Multiple casualties. I have 3 effectives. We are pinned down. Enemy closing from the ridges." The words appeared on Anya's screen. A death sentence written in stark, green text. "He's alive," Davies breathed, stepping closer to her station. "Holy hell, he's alive." Anya ignored him. Her focus was absolute. She was no longer just an analyst. A transformation was occurring. The quiet observer was gone. In her place was an operator. Her posture straightened. Her voice, when she next spoke, was different. It was stripped of all deference, all hesitation. It was the voice of command. "Corporal Reyes," she ordered, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Give me control of the J-Star imaging satellite, Sector Gamma 9er. Manual override. Now." Reyes, still shaken, stared at her. "Ma'am, that's above my authorization level. Only the general." "Do it." Matson cut in, his voice raw. He saw the shift in her, the sudden, terrifying competence. His own paralysis was broken by the need to follow her lead. He stumbled over to Reyes's console and typed in his command override codes. "Give her whatever she asks for." The satellite feed, grainy and distorted, appeared on one of Anya's side monitors. She cross-referenced the thermal signatures with the topographical map and Hunter 1's last known position. She saw the enemy fire teams moving down the slopes, a closing net of heat signatures. "Hunter, this is rescue. I have eyes on you," she typed. "Pop IR strobe on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." A tiny, brilliant point of light pulsed on the thermal feed. She had him. Acknowledged. "I am painting targets. Stand by." She began to move with an almost inhuman speed, her mind processing dozens of variables at once. One hand typed instructions to Hunter 1, the other controlled the satellite sensor package. While her eyes scanned enemy comms chatter, she was now decrypting in real time. "Fire team, northeast, behind the rock outcropping, 80 meters from your position. They are preparing to flank." To Davies, she barked, "Sergeant, get the QRF on a hard line. I don't care how you do it. Tell them to spin up. They have a new mission package. I'm transmitting coordinates now." She sent a compressed data packet containing the location of the crash site and the disposition of enemy forces directly to the QRF's battle command system, again using an unconventional, low-bandwidth channel. The men in the TOC watched, mesmerized. This was not an analyst filing a report. This was a conductor orchestrating a symphony of violence. She was fighting a battle on a dozen fronts, armed only with a keyboard and a satellite link. She saw the battlefield with a clarity that no one else, not even the men on the ground, possessed. She anticipated the enemy's moves, directing Hunter 1's small, battered team to shift their fields of fire, to use the terrain for cover, to conserve ammunition. She was their guardian angel, a ghost in their machine. She saw a heavy machine gun emplacement setting up on the western ridge, preparing to turn the crash site into a slaughterhouse. It was outside the effective range of Hunter 1's rifles. They needed something heavier. "General," she said, her tone level but absolute. "There is an AC-130 Spectre gunship on station 200 miles from here, supporting a different operation. I need it." Matson stared. "That's impossible. It's assigned to Task Force Neptune. I can't just—" "Task Force Neptune is monitoring a cold camp." Anya cut him off, her voice like ice. "My decryption of local chatter confirms the primary target left the area 6 hours ago. Their mission is obsolete. My mission is not. Get me that gunship." She wasn't asking. She was telling. The sheer, unadulterated certainty in her voice was compelling. Matson, without a second thought, grabbed a secure phone and began shouting at whoever was on the other end, demanding, pleading, using every ounce of his rank to divert the asset. While he argued, Anya kept her team alive. "Hunter, mortar team moving into position. Grid 3-4-5-8-9-1. You have approximately 90 seconds before they have a firing solution." She watched the thermal feed, her mind a cold calculator of time, distance, and death. She saw the 3 men of the mortar team setting up their tube. She saw Hunter 1 and his 2 remaining soldiers huddled behind the wreckage of their helicopter. The net was tightening. The 90 seconds were ticking away, and the Spectre was still an eternity away. The request for the Spectre gunship sent a shockwave through the chain of command. Diverting an asset of that magnitude from a priority mission was unheard of, especially on the word of an unknown civilian analyst in a besieged TOC. General Matson was on the SATCOM, his face flushed, his voice a low growl of pure fury as he battled with a distant, obstinate colonel from Special Operations Command. I don't care about your protocol. I have men dying on the ground. Divert the damned asset now. That is a direct order from a superior officer. There was a pause. Madsen listened, his jaw working, his eyes fixed on Anya. On whose authority? I'll tell you whose authority. Just a moment. He covered the receiver with his hand, his expression a mixture of desperation and confusion. He wants to know who is running this operation. Who is this rescue entity that has taken over my network? All eyes in the room fell on Anya. She hadn't paused in her work. Her fingers were still a blur, sending micro-corrections to Hunter One's position, monitoring the advance of the enemy, and tracking the slow progress of the QRF's helicopters as they navigated the treacherous mountain passes. The mortar team she had spotted was now fully operational. The first round was probably already in the tube. They had seconds left. She looked up from her screen for the first time, her gaze meeting Madsen's. There was no panic in her eyes, only a cold, hard clarity. "Tell him," she said, her voice dropping into a lower, more resonant register. The voice she had used a lifetime ago in places that didn't exist on any map. "Tell him the request is authenticated by Iron Ghost." The name fell into the silence of the TOC like a physical object. It wasn't shouted. It was stated. A fact. Iron Ghost. Corporal Reyes, who had been born the year the name first became a whisper in the intelligence community, just looked confused. But Sergeant Davies went rigid. His eyes widened, and the color drained from his face. He stared at Anya, not as an analyst, but as if he were seeing a legend made flesh. He had heard the stories in hushed tones in barracks late at night. Tales of a deep-cover operative who could walk through walls, who ran entire networks of agents from a laptop in a hostile city, who had exfiltrated assets from impossible situations with nothing but a burner phone and a set of forged papers. An operator so effective, so clean, she was more myth than person. Iron Ghost hadn't been active in nearly a decade. Most thought she was dead or a fabrication, a spook story to scare recruits. General Madsen froze completely. The SATCOM handset seemed to tremble in his grip. His mind, trained to process tactical data, now raced through a different kind of file. Personnel histories, after-action reports he'd been peripherally aware of, classified mission briefings he had only half-read. The Zargan Valley incident in '08. The rescue of the ambassador in Benghazi. The Black Sea operation where an entire enemy intelligence cell had simply vanished overnight. All of them had one thing in common. A single and signed appendix in the final report, referencing an external asset with the call sign Iron Ghost. He looked at Anya Sharma, at her plain, functional fatigues, her severe, tightly controlled expression, the way her hands moved over the keyboard not like a typist, but like a surgeon, each movement precise and essential. He saw it all now, the quiet confidence, the refusal to be intimidated, the immediate, almost precognitive understanding of the enemy's digital strategy. It hadn't been an analyst's guess. It had been an operator's assessment. His face, which had been a mask of rage and desperation, slackened into one of pure, unadulterated shock. He slowly raised the handset back to his mouth. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. The authentication is Iron Ghost. He didn't need to say anything else. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then, the colonel's voice came back, stripped of all its previous arrogance. It was clipped, professional, and utterly terrified. Spectre is retasked. On its way. ETA 7 minutes. Tell Iron Ghost. Godspeed. Madsen lowered the phone without another word. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. He was no longer the commander. He was a spectator. He and every other man in that room were witnesses to the return of a legend. Anya paid their dawning comprehension no mind. She was already back at work, fighting against the clock. Hunter. Mortar imminent. Shift position 15 meters west. Into the crevice. Now, leave the heavy gear. She watched the thermal signature of Hunter's team scramble behind a sliver of rock just as the first mortar round landed. The explosion a white-hot bloom of energy on the screen, exactly where they had been seconds before. Impact. Report, she sent. Close. We're in one piece. Concussion. But we're alive. How did you? Spectre is inbound. ETA 6 minutes. Keep your heads down. I will walk the guns in. Designate targets with your IR laser. Priority is the mortar team. For the next 6 minutes, Anya fought a delaying action. She fed Hunter 1 a constant stream of information, guiding his small team's fire to suppress the advancing enemy, forcing them to take cover, buying precious seconds. She was playing a deadly game of chess, sacrificing pawns of information to protect her king. She had them fire at ghosts, at empty positions, creating diversions that drew enemy attention away from their true flanking maneuvers. She was inside the enemy's decision cycle, using their own decrypted comms against them, making them react to threats that didn't exist while the real threat, a billion-dollar gunship, screamed toward them from the stratosphere. The men in the TOC had stopped trying to help. They simply stood and watched her work, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. They were watching a master at her craft, and the brutal, lethal artistry of it was mesmerizing. The quiet woman they had mocked, the bean counter they had dismissed, was single-handedly turning a massacre into a fighting chance. General Madsen did not sit. He stood beside her station, silent and humbled, his hands clasped behind his back, a subordinate officer waiting for orders from his true commander. The low, guttural growl of the AC-130's cannons crackled over the newly established secure channel, a sound that was music to the ears of every soldier on the ground. Spectre 1-1 on station, ready for tasking, Iron Ghost. The pilot's voice was laced with a reverence that bordered on religious awe. He knew the name. Spectre, this is Iron Ghost. Anya's voice was calm, a steady beacon in the storm. Welcome to the party. I am painting your first target now. On the main screen, a targeting box appeared, transmitted from Anya's console. It perfectly framed the enemy mortar position on the ridge. Hunter, laser on, she typed. A thin, invisible beam shot out from the crash site, and on the gunship's display miles above, the target bloomed. Target designated and confirmed, the Spectre pilot said. Engaging. Anya didn't watch the screen. She was already identifying the next threat. But the rest of the TOC did. They saw a stream of incandescent light, the 105mm howitzer of the Spectre, erupt from the sky. The shell traveled too fast to be seen, but its impact was apocalyptic. The section of the ridge where the mortar team had been simply vanished in a flash of fire and pulverized rock. A wave of relief so powerful it was almost a physical force, washed through the TOC. It was the first blow they had struck back. For the next 10 minutes, Anya systematically dismantled the ambush. Working in a seamless, deadly tandem with the Spectre gunship, she was the eyes and the brain of the operation. Her console became the nexus of the battle. She processed the satellite imagery, Hunter's laser designations, and the Spectre's own sensor feeds, prioritizing threats with terrifying speed and accuracy. Spectre, next target. Heavy machine gun, Western Ridge, coordinates on your screen now. Confirmed. Engaging. Another flash of light. Another enemy position silenced. Spectre, infantry squad advancing through the ravine, deploying 40mm cannon. Walking fire, east to west. Copy that Iron Ghost. Making it rain. The rhythmic, thumping sound of the Bofors cannon echoed through the comms, a mechanical heartbeat of death. On the thermal feed, a line of enemy heat signatures scattered, then winked out one by one. She was a reaper, harvesting the enemy from miles away, her commands as clean and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. She never wasted a shot. She never misidentified a target. She guided the QRF helicopters through a safe corridor she had cleared, bringing them to a landing zone just over the ridge from the pinned-down survivors. General Madsen watched, his face a stone mask. Every command she gave, every tactical decision she made was perfect. It was aggressive but controlled, ruthless but efficient. It was a level of operational mastery he had only ever read about in textbooks. He had sent his men into a perfectly laid trap. She, from a single keyboard, had not only saved them but had turned the enemy's trap back on them, crushing them with overwhelming, surgically applied firepower. The arrogance he had worn like a suit of armor had been stripped from him, leaving him exposed and humbled. He saw his own reflection in one of the dark monitors, a man who had mistaken confidence for competence, a man who had dismissed the single most capable person in the room because she didn't fit his narrow, prejudiced view of what a warrior looked like. The shame was a cold, heavy weight in his gut. Finally, the voice of the QRF commander came over the radio, clear and strong. "TOC, this is QRF lead. We have the survivors. Hunter 1 and 2 others. They're banged up, but they're with us. We are wheels up, heading home." The crisis was over. A mission that should have resulted in the complete loss of Alpha Team had ended with 3 survivors recovered and the enemy ambush force decimated. In the TOC, a collective, ragged breath was released. Men clapped each other on the back, their faces streaked with the sweat of vicarious fear. Corporal Reyes slumped in his chair, looking as if he'd aged a decade. Sergeant Davies simply stood staring at Anya's back, his expression one of profound respect. Anya herself showed no signs of triumph or relief. As the confirmation of the rescue came in, the tension seemed to flow out of her. Her shoulders, which had been ramrod straight, softened slightly. Her fingers slowed, then stopped. She typed one final message to the Spectre pilot. "Good hunting, Spectre. Iron Ghost is out." She leaned back in the chair, the sudden silence from her keyboard deafening. She closed her eyes for a single, long second. The storm had passed. The ghost had done her work. Now all that was left was the quiet aftermath. She opened her eyes, picked up the cold, half-empty styrofoam cup of coffee from her console, and took a small sip. It was just Anya Sharma, the analyst, again. But the room, and every man in it, had been irrevocably changed. General Madsen walked slowly, deliberately, to her station. He stood before her, not looming, but waiting. The other men fell silent, watching. This was the reckoning. He looked at the styrofoam cup in her hand, a symbol of her initial, lowly status in his TOC. Then he turned, walked to his personal coffee pot, a privileged machine that brewed single, high-quality cups, and poured a fresh one into his own heavy, ceramic mug, the one with his name and rank embossed on it. He walked back and gently took the styrofoam cup from her hand, setting it aside as if it were a piece of trash. He placed his own mug in front of her. The steam rose, carrying the rich aroma of fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the burnt sludge everyone else drank. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. It was a gesture of surrender, an offering, an apology. He gave her his cup, a symbolic transfer of authority and respect. Anya looked at the mug, then up at him. Her eyes were clear, holding no trace of accusation or triumph. She simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. He returned it, his own nod slow and formal, the gesture of a subordinate to a superior. Then he stepped back, leaving her in the quiet glow of her console, the undisputed master of his fallen kingdom. The hours that followed were draped in a thick, exhausted silence. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind the dull ache of fatigue and the metallic taste of near disaster. The TOC, which had been a crucible of chaos, now hummed with the quiet, methodical rhythm of post-mission procedure. Medics were on standby at the landing zone. Reports were being compiled. Ammunition expenditures were being logged. It was the banal bureaucracy of war, a necessary coda to its violent symphony. No one spoke to Anya. It wasn't a snub or a return to the earlier dismissal. It was the opposite. It was a form of reverence, a deep-seated awe that kept them at a distance. They gave her a wide berth, as if she were a source of immense power that might be dangerous to approach. Corporal Reyes, his face still pale, diligently worked on his comm station, but his eyes kept flicking over to the auxiliary port she had used, as if it were now a holy relic. He ran a full diagnostic on his systems, but this time he dug deep, following the precise instructions she had given him hours earlier. He found the logic bomb, dormant and malevolent, exactly where she said it would be. A cold sweat broke out on his brow as he realized how close he had come to presiding over a total communications collapse. Sergeant Davies, the hardened NCO, found himself performing a familiar ritual, field stripping and cleaning his service rifle. He hadn't fired a shot, but the methodical, repetitive motion of cleaning the weapon was calming. It was a soldier's penance, a way of restoring order to a world that had been violently upended. As he worked the cleaning rod through the barrel, he thought about the name. Iron Ghost. He'd told the younger soldiers the stories were just myths. He had been wrong. He felt like a child who had just learned his fairy tales were real, and that the quiet librarian in the corner was actually the dragon slayer. General Madsen had retreated to his small, glass-walled office overlooking the TOC. He didn't sit behind his desk. He stood at the window watching Anya. He had made a dozen calls, confirming what he already knew. Warrant Officer Anya Sharma was officially a logistics analyst assigned to his command for a resource evaluation. Her file was thin, sterile, and deliberately boring. But when he had used his highest clearance codes, overriding several security lockouts, he found the real file. It was almost entirely redacted. Black lines covered years of service history. But the commendations were there, listed only by code and date, a string of impossible achievements. And at the bottom, a single, stark notation. Call sign. Iron Ghost. Status. Deep cover legend. Do not engage. Do not question. Accommodate all requests. He felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't just dismissed an analyst. He had insulted a living legend. He had stood on the shoulders of a giant and complained that she wasn't tall enough. Anya, for her part, seemed oblivious to the bubble of awe that now surrounded her. She finished her coffee from the general's mug, then methodically began to wipe her presence from the TOC's systems. She deleted the custom-built communication client, erased the backdoor access logs, and restored the satellite control link to its default user. She was cleaning up her footprints, turning back into a ghost. When she was done, the console was exactly as she had found it. Blank, silent, and unassuming. She unplugged her datapad, coiled the cable with neat precision, and stood up. The TOC fell silent again. Every man watched as she walked toward the exit, her footsteps quiet on the concrete floor. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't say a word of farewell. Her work was done. As she reached the heavy steel door, General Madsen emerged from his office. He didn't speak. He simply stood at attention as she passed. It was a gesture of immense significance, the commander of a forward operating base showing formal deference to a warrant officer. Sergeant Davies saw it and rose to his feet, standing at a rigid parade rest. Reyes, seeing Davies, clumsily followed suit, his chair scraping against the floor. One by one, every soldier in the TOC got to their feet, standing in silent, unprompted respect as she opened the door and disappeared into the corridor. Anya did not go to the barracks. She walked through the pre-dawn chill of the base, the air sharp and cold in her lungs. The sky to the east was beginning to soften from inky black to a bruised purple. The jagged peaks of the mountains were silhouetted against the nascent light, their harsh beauty a testament to the unforgiving nature of this land. She found a quiet spot at the edge of the perimeter, an empty sandbagged emplacement that looked out over the valley where the battle had taken place. The sounds of the base waking up were distant and muted here, the rumble of a generator, the clank of metal, the faint shout of a sergeant mustering his troops. She was alone with the mountains and the coming day. She sat on the cold sandbags, her body finally allowing itself to feel the bone-deep weariness that followed such intense focus. She reached into a small, unassuming pocket on her fatigues and pulled out a worn leather pouch, softened with age and countless hours of handling. The drawstring was a simple leather thong. She opened it and tipped the contents into her palm. 3 stones. They were ordinary river stones, worn smooth and gray, each no bigger than her thumb. They were unremarkable to anyone else, but to her, they were a sacrament. One for the fallen of Alpha Team, one for the survivors, and one for herself, the observer who had been forced to intervene. She closed her hand around them, their cool, solid weight a familiar comfort. Her thumb began to rub over their surfaces in a slow, circular motion. It was a private ritual, a silent communion with the costs of her life. Each stone was a memory, a mission, a life saved or lost. The pouch held dozens more just like them, locked away in a safe place only she knew. These 3 were for today. A shadow fell over her. She didn't startle. She had heard him approaching, his heavy footfalls careful on the gravel path. "The survivors are stable," General Madsen said. He stood a respectful 10 feet away, not wanting to intrude on her space. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its earlier bluster. It was the voice of a man making a report. "Hunter 1 is asking who was on the comms," he said. "He said an angel talked him through hell." Anya didn't reply. She kept her eyes on the horizon, where the first sliver of the sun was now cresting the highest peak, bathing the valley in a pale golden light. Madsen waited, understanding that her silence was not an invitation for him to fill it. He stood there for a full minute, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and raw with an emotion she couldn't quite place. It might have been gratitude or shame or perhaps both. "Thank you, warrant officer." He used her proper rank. He said it with a weight that made it sound more significant than his own title. It was the only thing he could offer. Anya gave a slow, deliberate nod, her eyes still fixed on the rising sun. It was an acknowledgement, nothing more. He understood. There was nothing else to say. He had borne witness to her work, and that was enough. He turned and walked away, his posture straighter, but his steps heavier than before. Alone again, Anya continued her ritual. She watched the sun climb higher, the light chasing the shadows from the deep crevasses of the valley below. It was a new day, a day that 8 men had not lived to see, a day that 3 men would never have seen without her. She selected one of the stones, the one for the fallen, and with a flick of her wrist, she tossed it out into the valley. It made no sound as it landed somewhere in the vast, rocky expanse below. A small, silent offering to the land that had claimed them. She held the other 2 stones in her palm for a moment longer before placing them carefully back into the leather pouch and pulling the drawstring tight. The cost was always there, but today the cost was lighter than it might have been. She stood up, brushed the dust from her fatigues, and turned her back on the sunrise, walking toward the anonymous gray buildings of the base, ready to once again become the ghost.